So you introduced us, or I go for it?
I can introduce you.
Okay. Let me close my email because it always gets in the way. So you introduced us, or I go for it?
There we go. All right. Hello and welcome back to 1,000 Conversations About Our Future, where we answer all of your questions about the Green New Deal and we try and engage you, our lovely residents, about how to get involved and learn about all of the intricacies of decarbonization. I, again, am your lovely and charming co-host, Rebecca Evans, sustainability specialist with the city of Ithaca. And we are joined today by the king of hydrogen, I believe, Paul Mutolo. So welcome. And again, our trustful leader, Luis Aguirre-Torres, Director of Sustainability, the city of Ithaca. And we will be talking about hydrogen, the future, and everything in between. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Well, Paul, you know what? I need to start by saying thank you so much for being here. We know how busy you are. We know that, you make an effort to, to make yourself available every time we have a conversation. So I just want to say thank you, man. I really, really appreciate it. And second, I want to say the king of hydrogen, eh? Like, have you had better praise than that before?
That's really, really high praise. I'm so excited to be here and to join in this conversation. I've lived in Ithaca for a little over 15 years now. Although I didn't meet my wife here, we met over in Albany. She's an Ithaca native, and we'd like to talk about our kids who are growing up as sixth generation Ithacans, which is pretty cool. So having praise, I can tell you a story a little later about some recent praise as a hydrogen expert. I got called out by a Nobel laureate, which is pretty exciting to have that. But I think having a great Ithacan call me the king of hydrogen is right up there with that. So thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Which Nobel laureate? I mean, let's start with that.
Sounds good. So Stan Whittingham, who is one of the inventors of the lithium-ion battery, is a colleague who I've been working with for almost those whole 15 years that I've been here. He is regional. He's not here in Ithaca, but he is a professor down at Binghamton University. And he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry, I believe it was in 2020, so just last year. Although I might be wrong, it might have been in 2019, the COVID year, right? Everything is just scrambled in the calendar. But he very recently won the Nobel Prize for his role in inventing the lithium-ion battery. And at a recent conference, he got a hydrogen question and referred it to me as an expert in the room. So that was pretty humbling.
That is very cool, man. And honestly, now I'm gonna be just cool by association. I'm gonna tell this story to other people, and I am sure with time it will end up happening to me. Once I was with a Nobel laureate. And no, but this is kind of cool. But let me just, the idea of this is it's just to talk, right? I mean, and I have so many questions about you because every time we interact, we talk about hydrogen, we talk about renewable energy and stuff like that. But one of the things that I found very interesting is that you kind of have two jobs, right? I mean, you were with Cornell University, you co-founded Standard Hydrogen, and you just mentioned you have two kids.
Right.
So how do you do that, man? Do you ever sleep at all? I mean, is that why you look like a vampire right now?
Yeah, that's part of it. Hopefully the artificial lighting I have around me, although we have some good sun in Ithaca today, right? So that helps.
Yeah, a little.
But yeah, it is pretty crazy. A lot of credit goes to my wife, Jen, who is amazing and really helps me stay as balanced as I can be. And when I start veering off a little bit too far into work, then she reminds me, it's important and it's a mission, but it's not everything. And we need your help over here too. So she really helps keep me healthy in that way and helps me get back to a more balanced state.
Do you ever cook? Do you ever make dinner for everybody?
Yeah, I've just gotten back into the habit a little bit of doing that over the last couple of months. It's usually only once a week or so, but it does help. I realize that I kind of miss cooking, and Jen is so great at it. She's much better chef than I am. But I do like when I get a chance to jump in there and do a couple of things in the kitchen, and sometimes I get creative. Although usually I defer back to like my roots, and it's usually like a pasta and a vegetable kind of thing.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I think a lot of the people that I know in the same industry and, mostly in the same industry, because of COVID, we got into baking, we got into cooking. And, it's very interesting because I think, as you mentioned, it's everything is before and after COVID, but also at the personal level in a not so tragic way. A lot of us change our habits, the way we interact with our families, and, the way we perceive the future, which is kind of the focus of this conversation. So did that happen to you? Like, did you have a change in terms of the way you perceive, the direction your life is going, your work in hydrogen, or in general?
Because of COVID, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, since COVID, yeah, that time where everybody started thinking about life in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in some ways it did, and in some ways it didn't. I guess in one of the ways that it did is, especially during the early shutdown, it really helped us, all of us together, all four of us, to be able to have more family time, to not be just following whatever schedule is coming and whatever things are supposed to be on the list, but really to enjoy the kind of quiet time and shutdown time that sometimes we only had experienced in the summer when we got away to the mountains. And so having a chance to make the schedule up ourselves and having some freedom and flexibility in our jobs to be able to spend a lot of that time with our kids over those first few months was really great. And it's something that I try to remind myself of, that I'm always reminded by my dad, that time keeps accelerating on us. And it seems like the years keep going by faster as we get older, and you turn around and suddenly our kids aren't in elementary school anymore, and they're not even in school anymore. So it really gave us a chance to slow that down, and pay more attention to what they're up to and what their day-to-day is like, and be in their shoes, which I think helped a lot. So that was fun. It
Well,
also gave me a little bit of urgency around, the work that we're doing both at Cornell and with Standard Hydrogen around climate change, because a little bit of the idle time in there, and you start looking at the news and you start seeing what the weather patterns have been doing the last couple of years, and things are accelerating there too, in not such a comfortable way. But there's also a lot of amazing hope and a lot of amazing things that are happening, like the Green New Deal. Not to feel like that was a canned answer. That actually just came to my mind as we're talking about it, because that is one of the things that's moving the needle in such a great direction, that we can do this and we can push this ahead. And a good friend of mine from grad school, Sophia, is also working on carbon capture. So there are a number of different threads out there, and they're all pointing in some positive directions for getting the kind of impact that we need to have happen.
That's really cool to hear, man. I agree with you. Like, during COVID, I started thinking about my life myself. I started thinking about where I wanted to be, what I wanted to focus on. And then I came to Ithaca, and being here, meeting all these geeks for the environment, it's so many people who are experts on something, but, it all comes together in a very nice way. And I remember one of the first conversations that I had in City Hall when I took the job was, I want to build a microgrid and I want to power it with hydrogen. And I remember the early conversations, people were like, why hydrogen? I was like, well, it's cool, man. That's the future. But so let's say that you are with me in that conversation, and I am trying to sell, people in City Hall, the mayor, planners, economic development. I'm trying to sell them, hydrogen as really the future, because we've been there before. Hydrogen has been the future for a while, but I believe that now we're onto something. So what would you answer to somebody who's like, why? Why do you want to work in hydrogen? Isn't that proven to be, the wrong option? What would you say to that?
That's a great place to start, I think. I think for me, it comes down to a little bit of what you were reflecting on there, that many things are coming together at this point, across our energy systems, is how I'm thinking about it now. And when I'm looking at our energy systems, I often think about them in terms of electricity and transportation, mobility, and then other, like heating and chemical energy and making cement and this kind of thing. They're those three big buckets that, for me, I put them in those buckets. And all of them right now are moving toward getting the carbon out, right? And really getting the pollution out broadly, because carbon is a great thing to measure. And as you start to pull the carbon out, you realize you can also pull out other pollutants like the acid rain, sulfur oxides and nitrogen oxides, the ozone depleting chemicals and different things like that. So the direction that our energy systems are going and getting the carbon out and getting the pollution out is bringing up some great solutions like solar power, right? Solar electricity is now one of the least expensive ways to make electricity, and the same for wind. Electric vehicles are getting out there in such great numbers in the mobility space. But it's really hard to directly charge your car on the sun or the wind for a couple of different reasons. And it's complicated. But one of the easy answers is put some storage in the middle, put the electricity sponge that you need in the middle that can soak up the sun and the wind when there's too much of it around, and then deliver it out to the cars and other vehicles, trucks and what have you, boats, trains that need that energy when they need to get powered up. And hydrogen is just a great medium for that. It's excellent because it doesn't decay over time. It's really easy to make in a very flexible way. The sun and the wind are very flexible, as they should be. Nature scales are their own time scales, and our human scales could do a lot better starting to follow those natural systems instead of ignoring them. And to me personally, hydrogen gives us a little bit of that opportunity because it lets us pay attention to the wind and the sun and start to think about how much we're using that and how we're using it. And at the same time, it economically lets us have a vehicle that's available to us today. It's a really well-known technology. It's really safe and understood, and it works. It can deliver that energy from the sun and the wind right over to transportation or to a lot of other different places in that energy system that we just talked about.
That is a cool answer. I'm going to steal that from you, and I'm going to,
Cool.
give you no credit whenever I use it. But I was, every so often, because of the Green New Deal, I get this question like, why can't we electrify everything? And we're actually part of this campaign to electrify everything.
Yeah.
But there is the recognition that, like probably worldwide, only 50% of the energy stock can be electrified. And it has to do with energy density, it has to do with energy flow. And that's where hydrogen comes in. So I want to ask your opinion about that, like, where do you see, the limits of pure electrification, where hydrogen comes in? And you just mentioned right now, like hydrogen, helping, the electrification. But there are other uses for hydrogen also. And in answering that, I don't know if you could touch on, you mentioned it can come from the wind and from the sun, but it could also come from other sources that people are not very happy about when they talk about blue hydrogen and stuff like that. So
Right.
like how about those two things?
Yeah, so that sounds good. So I'll come back around to sort of my thoughts on where else it can help to electrify things and how, if we think about trying to electrify everything, if hydrogen has a role there. But first, let's touch on that last question you had about the different colors of hydrogen. There's all this discussion out there about blue hydrogen and gray hydrogen. I think I heard somewhere like fuchsia is now like a hydrogen color that's out there. Maybe it's pink or something like that. That depends on the source of the gas. So hydrogen itself is not a mined resource. We don't go get it as a primary source of energy like you might think of coal and oil. Although in my mind, those things are also secondary forms of energy. They came from somewhere else before too, right? So, but we don't go and mine hydrogen the same way we mine those other fuels. You have to generate hydrogen. It is the most abundant element in the universe, but it's not that naturally abundant as a gas here on Earth. But as an atom, I'm a chemist, right? So I'm going to talk chemistry just for a second. If you look at the periodic table way up in the corner, there's hydrogen as the atom hydrogen. That's all over the place around us, in water, in plant materials, in rocks and minerals. And there's many different ways, therefore, of extracting it and making it available as a pure gas. One of the great ways that we look at Cornell and with my company is extracting it out of the water by adding electricity, and then you generate completely clean hydrogen if you're using clean electricity. And that's what they call so-called green hydrogen. And that you can start to make a whole energy cycle around that, which is a water energy cycle, and it's closed and it has no carbon in it, which is kind of great. But it's really the minority way of making hydrogen today. It's only a few percentage points on the amount of hydrogen that's already used in the United States and really around the world today. The majority of the hydrogen in the United States today comes from natural gas. And a little bit of it, I think, comes also from coal. But natural gas, you can react with high pressure steam. And the three products you get out of that are hydrogen and carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. And that's primarily how it's made now. And it's used in everything from oil refining to plastics manufacturing to ammonia manufacturing for fertilizer and that kind of thing. And even some of the cars that are running on hydrogen today in California that are fuel cell cars, so they have no tailpipe emissions coming out of that car, except for a little bit of water. A lot of those are running on that same kind of hydrogen, so-called gray hydrogen that comes from natural gas. And a little footnote here, because those cars are so efficient, we'll maybe get to efficiency later in this conversation, but because a fuel cell makes electricity in such an efficient way that even though that hydrogen originally has a carbon footprint, the carbon footprint of those miles is still a lot less than a regular gasoline car today. And it's even a little better than a first generation Prius. Now, I'm not sure about the third generation Prius, what we have driving around the roads today. I'll have to go look up that math and see how that compares. But that's just to say that fuel cells and hydrogen are going to be part of the solution going forward, even if the hydrogen isn't the greenest. In my mind, that's just a little bit of a bridge. Having hydrogen available today that comes from other sources is a great way to start demonstrating these technologies like fuel cells, which are good for transportation. They're also good for the grid. And they can also be using that hydrogen for other sources like cement manufacturing and like making ammonia. And then when you start seeing hydrogen as its own part of the energy system, well, then you can get the carbon out of the hydrogen too and encourage stuff like electrolysis, which is moving from the carbon cycle of hydrogen to the water cycle of hydrogen. Because once you have hydrogen, everything downstream is the same. The cars like it, doesn't matter where it comes from. The grid, fuel cells will like it. The ammonia manufacturers, cement manufacturers. There's this great map that the DOE has put together called H2 at scale. And you can go Google it and look it up. And it shows all the different places where hydrogen is already today in our system and can be. And when we start to recognize that set of threads, well, then we're just super motivated to start pulling the carbon out of all those things and moving to a system that hydrogen is part of and also can be a vehicle for getting the carbon out. So that was just like a super long answer, but
it's I mean, before we go into the other topic,
Yeah.
I mean, I want to stop you there for a second and ask, like, you know, for a long time, we've been seeing these with energy transitions through time, right? You know, from whale oil to coal to oil to natural gas, and you know, every time we go like halfway through the transition, we realize, oh crap, this is probably not ideal because it has a lot of emissions, you know. But then we went from coal to something better, and then to something even better, and then natural gas was our best friend for a while, and now it's like, man, it's the main source of methane, it's the main source of carbon emissions, so we need to do something with that. Are we at risk when we talk about hydrogen in that way? I mean, thinking about hydrogen as a transitional fuel source, or why don't we just jump to green hydrogen? Why don't we like ignore gray, blue, and we go to green? Is that at all possible right now?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's totally possible. And part of that's my biased answer because, you know, I like to think really far in the future and like to think about the impacts of what we're doing and what the changes are. But I also have a company on the side, not on the side, but I have a company hat that I wear, as you mentioned, which is building a business around exactly that, around completely green hydrogen. And we see an economic opportunity to do that today and to start moving in that direction right now. I think part of the reason that all these transitions, as you mentioned before, have kind of come in waves, and then people wonder, oh, there's a problem with that. Let's move on to the next thing. and move on to the next thing, a lot of times those have been in forward directions, but every once in a while, there's also a back step, right? We can think about gasoline and the different additives to gasoline. Some of those have been back steps and caused more problems than where we were before. To me, that comes from having too narrow a perspective. So the people that are helping to implement our energy solutions, I think, have a responsibility to have as broad a perspective as possible, which in my mind is this thing called a life cycle analysis. It looks at the whole cradle to grave of the energy cycle, meaning the energy process that you're thinking about bringing in, and see what all those impacts are. And so I mentioned a little bit of that with these fuel cell cars in California. People have looked at that whole life cycle analysis, and even with so-called gray hydrogen today, that still moves the ball forward toward a cleaner future than gasoline cars allow today. But I think a lot of people worry about dollars, and they look at how expensive hydrogen is and how expensive it is to produce. There are lots and lots of experts out there you can ask and say, well, producing hydrogen from electrolysis costs more per kilogram per unit of hydrogen you're going to generate than if you just get it from natural gas. So the industry will never go that way. I think that's too limited in a view, because all you're looking at is that one thing, like a commodity. It turns out that hydrogen, in this perspective, as I mentioned with this web that the DOE has drawn out, it's not just a commodity chemical. You have to think of it like part of the fabric of the energy system. It becomes not just the electrons in the wire, but also the wires and even part of the substation. When you add all those things together in our electricity system today, well, that's a lot more than just the price per kilowatt hour coming to your house. Now you're looking at the infrastructure and the way that the system connects to our neighbors and to our neighboring towns. When you start to view hydrogen in that perspective, now it makes a lot more sense to go green as soon as you can. And it makes a lot more dollars and cents because it's more economic to do it that way too.
Yeah, I think Bloomberg New Energy Finance was talking about, this week about how the cost of energy storage has come down 90% in the last 8 years. Yeah. And they were also talking about the levelized cost of hydrogen and the levelized cost of energy in general. And so what you just mentioned right now, I think you would agree with their view that this is going to continue going down. And if we are producing green hydrogen, the levelized cost of hydrogen is going to continue going down, and at some point it's going to be more than competitive. It's going to be the only viable solution, right? Is that your take too?
That's also absolutely true. Yeah, I agree with that. And so some people are sitting there on the sidelines and waiting for that, cost in the curve to kind of knee out and come down. And we're a lot more bullish on that, both at Cornell and in the company, seeing opportunities to jump on that curve right now and make great inroads to helping our energy system show how energy storage can help, demonstrate all the benefits of what energy storage can do, and then lay the groundwork for just making that curve show up a lot faster than if we all just kind of waited around for it to happen from some other sector. So, but yeah, I totally agree with that analysis. I think that's spot on.
But what about this is very interesting because I've been involved in these conversations, honestly, on both sides at some point, about one of the problems that we have with this transition we are promoting right now is stranded assets. And, the government at some point allowed the utility companies to lay out new natural gas infrastructure that is not fully depreciated. So there is this idea, can we actually reuse that? Can we blend hydrogen, for example? Can we reuse the natural gas infrastructure? What about embrittlement? I mean, what are our options in terms of dealing with that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it brings up we talked a little bit about how hydrogen is made and what the different spectrum of colors are on the making of hydrogen side, and now we're getting into a little bit about what you do with the hydrogen and how you use it. It's true that there's some investments that have been made in natural gas infrastructure, and as newer pipelines have been put in, a lot of those are capable of carrying hydrogen around. And they are plastic pipes essentially, and those plastic pipes are exactly what is used. It's the same material as used in the vehicle tanks, the fuel cell cars, hydrogen tanks out in California. So it's totally compatible. But if at the end of that pipeline, all you're doing is burning the fuel that's in there, there's maybe one potential benefit, and I see at least two downsides. And so one potential benefit is that here in the Northeast, right, here we are in early December, and it's pretty balmy out there today. It's a comfortable day for December, but we know in a couple of weeks it's going to be cold here, and it'll be cold for a little while, maybe not as long as last year, but it'll still be pretty cold for a while. That's difficult to do with just electricity, right? It's expensive with resistive electricity. It's a little more efficient with heat pumps. And if you have a combination of those two, then I think there's some interesting things to look at. But it's clear that today you can also do that really well by just burning a chemical fuel and making that flame in your furnace or your boiler and getting that heat that way. So that's interesting, and that's a potential benefit, because I think the potency of that heat is something that we shouldn't immediately take off the table. We need to do the life cycle analysis of that and compare it to the life cycle analysis of full electrification. And I myself haven't seen a good comparison in that way yet. When we do that, what you'll see is that the full life cycle analysis of burning hydrogen, there's some emissions that are still in there. They're not carbon emissions, but they are nitrogen emissions, and that causes acid rain. And look, I spent a lot of time, I'm really lucky to have spent a lot of time in the Adirondacks growing up. And a lot of my motivation for wanting to do a project and build a career that has the potential for impact on our environment is growing up in those mountains and learning from my grandfather, who himself learned from a Native American, about the balance that you can see happening when you live in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. And there used to be a lot less wildlife up there growing up than there is now, because the Clean Air Act didn't exist yet. And there was a lot of pollution coming over from Midwest states, starting to acidify the lakes, starting to have a downstream impact on wildlife. There were never moose around, and when I was young and growing up, there were never eagles. Those things are returning now. And it's pretty amazing to see that turn around because of people's attention to the need for clear air. And so I think when you look at the costs that you would need to do to upgrade boilers and upgrade furnaces, or even upgrade power plants, there's a lot of that talk going around now too. Pipelines are one thing, but then the burner itself is another. How much cost is that going to take to upgrade that burner compared to using a fuel cell? Which we mentioned efficiency a little while ago. Emissions are one thing, and it's very important to pay attention to emissions. Then there's efficiency. So burners are great for heat. That's why I mentioned that in the home, I think the jury for me is still out on how to best heat our homes. But the math is very clear to me on power generation. If you're trying to extract electricity from a chemical fuel, burning it is a pretty dumb thing to do, in my opinion, because burning it, you don't get any access to the electrons. The electrons are down there in the fuel, in the chemicals that we're talking about. And yet when you burn them, they just jump around in the flame, and you have to get the electricity over here from a generator that's spinning. And those electrons are from that magnet, right? They have nothing to do with the chemistry. A fuel cell lets you jump right down inside that molecule, grab a hold of the electrons, and really yank it right out of the chemistry. And so it does that with 2 or 3 times greater efficiency than a burner could ever do. And that's just physics. That's just the physics of a heat engine. And so that's the kind of conversation I really think needs to start happening at the level of power generation and thinking about sunken infrastructure costs. Because I think that's going to change the game a lot. And I'm kind of happy that the Dance Camera plant had their permit, not yet issued by the DEC, because I'm hopeful that means they're looking at this more closely and seeing what the impacts are of choosing a different technology that doesn't involve combustion.
No, and I agree with you. I think, once you look at, what has to be considered in order to determine the actual cost of production of energy, you look at carbon emissions. You have to look at carbon emissions, but you also need to look at the levels of efficiency that you can aspire to. And the reality is that coal, natural gas, even nuclear is it's obviously much higher, but in general it's so low that it doesn't make any sense. For example, as you mentioned, just to burn hydrogen. I really, you know, without really thinking about it, we talked about the upstream, we just talked about the midstream. So what about the downstream? What about the final use for hydrogen? Either as a fuel, for example, if we were to use it, ammonia to transport it somewhere else, or as fuel cells. What do you see as the main uses for it today and tomorrow?
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes to mind right away is the idea of transportation. And passenger cars are in California today. They run on fuel cells. Some of them run on fuel cells. You could pull up to any number of, I think there are 45 or 50 different hydrogen refueling stations today. And you can refill your car in about 4 minutes and then drive away with a totally electric car that gets 500 plus miles range, doesn't get affected by the weather, and is totally clean because all that's coming out of the tailpipe is water. Now, people argue that that's not going to be the best and you can just get a battery car. And I think that's true. Battery cars for a lot of people are going to be all you need, and you won't need a hydrogen car. But you might need a hydrogen bus. You might need a hydrogen tractor trailer or hydrogen trains. As you get to bigger and bigger vehicles, the advantages of batteries start to become limited because of their weight and because of their recharge time. And so thinking about clean hydrogen for those transportation applications, I think is a good way to go. And a lot of companies are moving in that direction to making those kinds of trains and buses and trucks. Europe is a little bit ahead of us on that. But there are companies right in our neighborhood, BAE Systems, which is down here outside of Binghamton in Endicott, New York, is a world leader in hydrogen buses. And we had a project with them actually here in the city of Ithaca a couple of years ago that was going to look at one of those buses. TCAT was going to get one. It didn't work out the way any of us wanted it to, but we still look for opportunities to try to bring those buses to New York State. And I think we're getting closer to doing that. So that's definitely an application space where I think the hydrogen is going to make a difference. The other big one is for the grid. If we think about the electric grid, our state has these great mandates to move to completely renewable electricity, wind and solar and hydro. At the same time, all of us want the grid to remain very reliable, to continue to be more resilient to weather outages and other outages, and also to stay economical. And so now I'm going to bring back that concept of the sponge. We need energy storage to go along with all these renewables, because renewable power is weather dependent and has its own other cycles of intermittency, that if we just had wind and solar by themselves, the grid would go up and down, just like the wind and solar go up and down. They don't really act really well as base load, the way we think of it, unless you pair them with storage. When you pair them with storage, then the storage takes out the peaks and fills in the valleys of when the wind and solar are available at surplus or not available at all. And I think there's going to be a portfolio of storage, just like we have a portfolio of renewables. There'll be a portfolio of storage options. Batteries are out there doing great things for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. Pumped hydro and other kinds of really large installations of storage are doing great things for potentially weeks of storage that's needed. I think hydrogen has a great role to serve in the middle, because you can pull in low-cost renewables when they're available. You can store that indefinitely for as long as you want, but then in very quick timeframes, you can deliver it back as electricity to the grid. And you can do really exciting things like have that be a community energy storage system that a whole neighborhood can use to be resilient against storms, against weather outages that can be dramatic, or they can be subtle. There are these things like wind droughts, where Europe wind farms had to shut down because there just was no wind, not for a few hours, but I think it was a few days or maybe even weeks A year or two ago, Germany had this issue. And so that's a pretty quiet weather event, but it still would affect the grid once we move to a great percentage of renewables, which we definitely need to do. So storage is going to help buffer those kinds of things. And the last thought I have about that is when you build a community energy station like that, whether it's based on hydrogen or based on batteries or whatever other technology might be out there, if you site that at the community, first of all, you deliver all those air quality benefits right to that community. You take away the natural gas peaker plant, you take away the upstream coal plant, you put the zero emission energy storage right at your fingertips. And then you get people to connect with those solar farms and wind farms, even if they're offshore or way, out of the downtown area somewhere. They're just not where you can really see them. I think we need to start reversing that trend and bring the energy resources back to us and let people come up and see, oh, here, I'm going to go plug in my car and charge up my car with some electricity that came from the Tugwell Plateau last night. That's pretty cool. And be able to do that kind of thing. So those are places where I think that hydrogen is going to start to have an impact.
Energy geeks like me would like to see, solar and wind and hydrogen all over the place. But if you really look at a solar map or a wind atlas, and then you start looking at, the best places for deploying those technologies, you would see that New York State is not the best. It's not the worst either, but it's not the best. And some people think that the combination could help, but the reality is that this state is not going to rely solely on either one of those technologies. So hydrogen comes in as you mentioned, like for load shifting, it comes in, to provide a ton of applications that normally we attribute only to electrochemical storage. And I really think that, you hit the nail in the head, basically by saying, hydrogen is vital to make other technologies viable at the scale that we need to have this transformation. So I want to go directly to this community. And, before we had this conversation, when we announced that the king of hydrogen was going to join us, some people sent some questions in advance, and you have addressed most of them. People are concerned about is it only natural gas, or can we also have green hydrogen? So you answer all of those things. But some people were asking, what are the immediate applications? I mean, can we deploy hydrogen tomorrow here in the city? I mean, is there any way we can take advantage of this technology today? So what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I'd say everything has to be done safely. So you have to be at least going through the permitting process to make sure everything's done safely. But absolutely, safety is important for everything. And energy technologies, we want to keep safety at the top of our minds. And then, yes, if the city or if individuals in the community get together and say, we want hydrogen to do this, this, or this, that can be hydrogen fuel cell cars at Ithaca Car Share or Enterprise. Go buy them from California today. There's numbers of them you can buy as used vehicles, and we can put up a station to help serve the hydrogen refueling needs. If TCAT wants a hydrogen bus, yes, we go call up BAE Systems and go get those in the fleet so we can be testing those out. If Ithaca wants hydrogen energy storage for the community to help back up solar or become resilient to storms, then yes, those things are all commercially available. And our company, not to be an advertisement for our company, but one of the projects in New York State that's going to start demonstrating this is the utility that's just east of us. National Grid has a service territory that covers Syracuse and Albany, and then over into Massachusetts as well. And they're working with our company to install a station that will demonstrate all those things in the Albany area. And so the New York PSC, the Public Service Commission, approved that. And I think it means that people are excited to see hydrogen start to show up in the New York energy system. And we are too. And we'd love to have Ithaca, be part of that in any form that the community here wants that to be happening.
Well, let's make it happen, man. I think this example with TCAT is a very interesting one. TCAT, is going right now, at least it seems that they're going the route of electric buses. They have this deal with Proterra. They have 7 of those right now. There is, the chance they will get more of those. But I think still there is a very good application for hydrogen, right? I mean, I'm thinking, 47 electric buses, where are you going to charge them? How do you charge them? At what time can you do that? I mean, is hydrogen going to facilitate this in any way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's a subtlety of what hydrogen can also do. That same kind of sponge activity that it can pull in solar and wind when they're in surplus. It can also deliver a whole bunch of electricity when it's needed on the load side. So we're talking to developers of electric vehicle charging stations that are looking at putting in banks and banks of EV chargers in different places around the Northeast. And some places that gets really expensive to run, because when you have a really big spike of electricity that you have to deliver, that gets expensive for the people that are buying the electricity from that meter. Well, our system can help buffer that spike to make it both less expensive, but then you also get to make it 100% renewable, because we've charged up our system on 100% renewable energy. So now, whether it's EV chargers or a bunch of Proterra buses at TCAT, you can directly connect them back to the resources of the sun and the wind and the hydro that we have in our state, because you've decoupled the timing of charging the bus versus when you're getting the electricity from the grid. So you make that both less expensive and easier for the grid to handle. And then you also get to deliver through completely green electricity by way of hydrogen.
That is so cool, man. I think, you're really making hydrogen sexy again. And I think that's kind of what we needed. As you know, in the Ithaca Green New Deal, the goal is to fully decarbonize the city. And that means, we have to shut down anything that is fossil fuels. And, we have cars, we have buildings. That's the way we heat our buildings, natural gas, propane, fuel oil. And we're looking at all of these alternatives. And, I've been saying, we cannot electrify everything, but that we cannot electrify, we can probably rely on hydrogen. So in that context, if forget about cost, forget about regulation, where do you see hydrogen playing a role in the full decarbonization of the city of Ithaca?
Yeah, I think there's some really exciting ways to think about it. When you want to demonstrate how carbon-free we can get, then my mind goes right to the analog that a bunch of chemists like to talk about, which is hydrogen is kind of the chemical equivalent of electricity. And so what the heck does that mean? So let me back up for a second and talk about fuels versus electricity, because I think this will come back to this picture of, how do we decarbonize everything? Electricity is great for many things. Obviously, lighting and electric vehicles are great applications. But when you really need to transfer energy really fast and a lot at the same time, it's really hard to beat a chemical fuel. If people like to talk about how many kilowatt hours your car takes to drive from here to Binghamton and back, the kilowatt hour is the bucket of energy we're talking about. The reason it takes 25 minutes to charge your car, even at a really fast charger, is because that energy has to go into the battery and push the chemistry around inside carefully so that it's safe and so that battery will last a long time. And that's just part of the cost of how batteries work. When you need to have energy move a lot faster than that, if you look at the gasoline pump, it comes with all these negative things about emissions and toxicity and safety, but you're talking about megawatt hours per second that you're pumping up into your vehicle. It's a whole lot of juice, if you will, in that hose. So hydrogen offers that same opportunity and can be completely emissions-free and non-toxic and safe at the same time. So where there are places in the energy economy and places in the energy system that you really need that potency of power or heat or energy for other needs, then I think that it's interesting to look at hydrogen, because it is all the benefits of a chemical fuel, but all the zero emission benefits of electricity. That's what I meant by kind of the chemical analog of electricity.
So it goes back to that question about, energy flow and energy density, right? And
yeah,
I think, I'm sure you're familiar with the hydrogen ladder, that has been going around that has to do with the applications regarding the applications and the economic and technical feasibility of hydrogen. And I think at the end of the day, it all goes back to those two things, right? Energy flow, energy density. So we have hydrogen on one side for applications that require high density, require high energy flow, and hydrogen is ideal and it's clean, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
it just makes it like, why haven't we, go for it? I mean, I know that Europe is investing, the hydrogen highway that it's been built in Europe. It's billions of dollars going to that. I mean, why do you think the US is not investing as heavily, or is the US investing in the same way?
It is starting to now. Yeah, it's come back around. So this new administration and Secretary Granholm in the Department of Energy and all the different aspects of what the Department of Energy is doing have started these so-called Earth shots. So you remember back in, this was before my time, but the space race and getting to the moon was like the moon shot, and getting ourselves up there and beating out other countries to be competitive and get to the moon first. Well, this Department of Energy has coined what they call the Earth shots, which are taking a really hard look at our energy system and taking the big jumps that we need to get to the cleaner, more resilient, and more economic future. And the first one of them was the hydrogen Earth shot. So they're putting billions of dollars, and this is also part of the new infrastructure bill that just got signed. There are billions of dollars that they're going to start investing in getting hydrogen into our energy system in the places where it makes sense, and driving the cost down as quickly as we can so that we're not, making ourselves go broke as we put that hydrogen into the energy system. So we are starting to invest now as a country, but it wasn't always that way. And even great administrations like under Secretary Chu, who was the Secretary of Energy under the Obama administration, he just didn't get it. He didn't really believe in fuel cells. He didn't see the big picture of what they could do for the energy economy. And so there were a number of years there where we stepped back a little bit because the administration at that time was skeptical of the previous administration. During the Bush administration years, there was a lot of hydrogen talk. And under Secretary Chu, they were skeptical of that. And they weren't sure how much of that was real. But I think the science has been done now, and a lot of great science at the national labs over the years. And they've shown how many different places hydrogen can have a positive impact to our energy system. And so now we're starting to make those investments. And I think it's going to unlock a lot of private investments that are very interested to get into the space and to be part of the future of our energy systems.
Well, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you kind of like mentioned these, and I'm just really curious. I don't know if you can answer, but I am guessing, like what you're working on, and for you've been working on it for a while, so you understand this, and you know what needs to happen now. So that is so valuable for venture capitalists, for private equity firms. Are you getting phone calls all the time? Are you now people want to invest in your company?
We are starting to get more phone calls. I expect that as soon as we get to be more public about our news with National Grid, which will probably start just after the first of the year in 2022 here, I expect our phones will be a lot more busy than they are now. We're already getting some attention and some great positive response from the people that are really in the know and really paying attention to what utilities are doing. And we wanted to start with a utility because we see this as really a fabric of where the electric grid has to go, is to embed a very versatile kind of energy storage as part of that grid. And so as soon as that news really hits the street, yeah, I think we're going to get a lot more phone calls than we are right now, and that'll be fine. It's been already kind of a fire hose, couple of months in terms of like drinking from the fire hose and having lots going on. And so it's happening at a good time for us because I think we'll be prepared for what's coming in January.
Yeah, I bet you have to prepare, man, because you are in the middle of it. This is kind of the future, and we're going to be fighting, in terms of the colors. We're going to be fighting in terms of the pipes, but nobody can deny the efficiency and how clean the application of hydrogen can be and how transformative that technology truly is, and I am jealous that you are, working in that. It's like the kind of thing that I would love to work as an energy geek myself.
It is a super exciting time, and yeah, hopefully we can keep our heads, kind of squarely in the projects that need to happen and our feet squarely on the ground, and really make some exciting things happen in this coming year.
Well, we have one question coming, from the audience that, watching live on YouTube. And that question has to do with whether hydrogen can replace nuclear as a baseload energy system. So do you think there is a possibility that we can do that?
That's interesting. Yeah, so I think of hydrogen, again, mostly in this form of energy storage. So it's not a primary source of energy, because in order to get electricity out of the hydrogen, you still have to get the hydrogen from somewhere. Mm-hmm. Now, there is a possibility to harness hydrogen from some waste products like landfills and some wastewater treatment facilities and some other parts of our industrial system. There are ways to harness hydrogen from those waste streams. And so maybe in that regard, you could then think of that going toward energy generation. But the numbers that I've seen are not going to be enough to replace a big source of electricity like nuclear.
Yeah, I think that's hard. I honestly believe that it would be very, very difficult. I mean, it's fantastic for, perhaps peak shaving or load shifting and to support, when you have intermittence or to defer investment in the grid. There are so many applications that, but yeah, replacing something like nuclear, that's a harder problem. That's something that may not be what we want.
Maybe hydrogen plus wind or hydrogen plus solar, if it's done the right way, that's more possible, I think. But hydrogen by itself, I don't think can fill that gap.
Okay, well, I have one more question just to close, and this is a tough question. What do you have for Thanksgiving when you're sitting at the table? What is it that you ate? And also, do you talk about hydrogen with your family when you're in Thanksgiving, for example?
We definitely talk about hydrogen way more than we probably should. My son Andrew is convinced that his first job is going to be to work at one of our hydrogen stations. So he's very excited about this. Whenever he hears me talking about hydrogen, he starts reminding me, in case I forgot, that he wants to come and work at the station, which is pretty exciting. And so I think also my son Nicholas has been talking to people about making sure that they get some hydrogen boats pretty soon, because he doesn't want to have to keep filling up a boat with gasoline and worrying about the fish. And so that conversation does happen, which is fun. And usually it's one of the easier conversations to have, because I'm really lucky to have a great family around me, and my in-laws that are here locally, and my other family that's further away. But all of them are behind this and excited to see it start showing up. The hardest part of the question is, like you had earlier, it's just about when. Like, when can we see it? When can we get it? When can we have it in our hands? So that went along with the very traditional kind of turkey and stuffing and squash dinner that we had on Thanksgiving last week.
Well, I think, to be honest, Paul, it's wonderful to know that you are working on this. It's great to know that actually a very good person is also working on this and trying to create a better future for everybody. I think it's a lot of us working on this. I just want to recognize that everything that you guys are doing at Standard Hydrogen is quite unique, is very valuable, and I see it at the very core of everything that we need to do to make this transition possible. So thank you very much, man. I appreciate you spending some time with us. And just to close, do you have any last comment about anything you want before we go?
I just wanted to say this was so much fun. I really appreciate the interest. I hope that you all get some good feedback and follow up. I'm happy to come back sometime in the future and talk more about it. But I also want to reflect that, this community is a pretty amazing place. And there have been a lot of reverberations that I've had in my professional network around the work that you're doing, and especially the great announcements you've had recently about all the electrifications of the buildings. Not only are people coming up to ask us professionally about what are you all doing? Can you help? What's going on with hydrogen? But just how do we make that happen everywhere? Because that's exactly the recipe that we need, not just for Ithaca, but what a great example to set for so many other cities around the country that we need to have doing this now. So thanks so much for your leadership and exciting things happening around Ithaca. And I can't imagine a better place for us to be starting our company than here, and having us be able to demonstrate things here and then go replicate things everywhere. So I'm pretty excited about what's to come.
That's very kind of you, Paul. And right back at you. I think we're doing something good here. I think we need to be committed. We need to be intrepid. We need to continue moving forward. We need to continue pushing. So we can make this transition not only real but also equitable. And I really think that sharing this with you has given me a ton of ideas. We're gonna get a lot of emails. I know we do every time after these conversations. You're gonna get marriage proposals. You're gonna get ideas. You're gonna get resumes. You're gonna get all kinds of things. But we'll pass them on to you when the time is right. But for now, thank you very much. We want to say goodbye to everybody who joined us on YouTube to watch this. And this is gonna stay online, so you can come back and rewatch it. I know that a lot of the stuff that Paul talked about is kind of complicated, but you can watch it again and then eventually ask the right question to the king of hydrogen. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you.